All right, y'all, we are live. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I am so excited for this conversation, y'all. Thank you so much to everyone who has joined us right now on a Thursday at 4 p.m. Ooh, 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 ooh. This is, if y'all already made it this far into the week, bless you. And especially joining us right now at 4 p.m. I'm guaranteeing you that this conversation is going to fuel you. It's going to energize you. We have two amazing fellows joining us right now. So right now, if you're joining us, please let us know in the chat where it is that you're joining us from. How excited are you about listening to the pearls of wisdom that Maria and Byron are gonna drop? Ooh, I'm so excited. And while we're doing that, let me introduce myself. I am Carol Bona. I am the communications manager at LatinxEd. And if anyone is tuning in for the first time to LatinxEd and y'all are figuring out what it is that we do, we are an educational nonprofit. And our mission is to expand Latinx leadership and to expand educational equity and opportunity in North Carolina. So please let us. Lizzie is already coming through. She's saying that she's joining from Chapel Hill and she can't wait to hear what everyone has to share. Love it, Lizzie. So y'all, if this is the first cafecito con LatinxEd that you are joining us with, this is the sixth in a series that we have been putting together with our LatinxEd fellows. Ooh, and y'all can go and check the previous cafecitos that we have put together. Please do it afterwards because you don't want to miss this one. But right now, I am sitting here con María Hofman Hernandez y Byron Tenesaca, and we're going to be talking about how to decolonize educational spaces. And you saw it in the title, y'all, Nuestra Liberación. But before we dive in and we talk about all these juicy topics, I would love for y'all to get to know a little bit more about Byron and Maria. So Maria, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carol. So my fullest name is Maria Conchita Genevieve Hofman Hernandez, and my immigrant roots are from El Salvador. My mother is Salvadoreña, and her parents are from Mayachorti and Lenca heritage. I'm a second generation U.S. citizen and the first on my mom's side of the family to be born and raised in the U.S. I studied English at the undergraduate level and moved on to study writing in a master's in fine arts program in Louisville, Kentucky. And now I'm in an educational doctorate program at Appalachian State University. I'm working as a director for a community organization that I founded called Vecina Appalachia, which is here in Boone, and we are working for community equity for housing and neighborhood equity in the Watauga area. I'm an interdisciplinary instructor for Kaiser Online's general education program. I'm a doctoral candidate at Appalachian State University's Wright College of Education, and I'm a lover of nature and animals.
And Felicia just shared in the chat, yay, another doctora. Yes, y'all, we need as many doctoras, as many PhDs as we can to come through, okay? And in case Maria's short and sweet bio didn't give away, she likes to say busy, and we need her in all these spaces because, does she have a brilliant mind on her shoulders, y'all. Byron, would you like to take it away?
Yes, can you hear me?
Absolutely, come through.
Just shout out to Maria. She does a lot of good work, man. Aichishi Mashikunas. Good afternoon, my friends. Nyuya. Nyuka Shutimi Kan Byron Tenesaca Waman. My name is Byron Tenesaca Waman, and I am a visual arts teacher, elementary art at Johnston Elementary here in the Asheville area in North Carolina. And I identify as an immigrant, Indigenous, and Quechua Cañari. I have a BFA in studio art from Western Carolina University. And a couple of years later, I also got an MAT in comprehensive education. I'm an interdisciplinary visual artist. And I like to identify also as a bilingual visual artist because in my class, students not only learn about the visual arts, but also a little bit of Spanish here and there. And that's one of the things I'm very passionate about. I serve my community as a visual artist, and I'm just starting my journey. So I'm looking forward to where I will be. And two things about me: I'm working on becoming a fourth generation basket weaver. And I say basket weaver instead of basket maker because my grandma was a basket maker, and I'm just learning weaving. And to be a basket maker takes a lot of years. So I also identify with the mountains. I've been living here in Western North Carolina for about 5 years now, over 5 years. And I grew up in the Andes Mountains of Ecuador, south part of Ecuador. And so growing up in the Andes Mountains and now living here in the mountains of Appalachia, I love it. So that's two things about me. And some of these mountain works and the community and the plants and all of this, it's involved in my visual artwork as well. So
y'all, if you aren't following Byron on Instagram yet, you are missing out. Our lovely Isa Salazar is dropping in the Facebook chat all the ways that y'all can be connecting with Byron and Maria. So please do yourselves a favor and start following them on all the socials. Felicia just mentioned in the chat, Western NC in the house, okay? Because we're definitely representing here with both of y'all. Ooh. So after those glorious introductions, let's just get en el meollo del asunto. Let's just get into the juiciness of it all. This cafecito is called Nuestra Liberación, Decolonizing Educational Spaces Through Creative Expression. And if both of Byron and Maria's bios didn't give it away, they have a whole lot of creativity oozing through their veins, just running through their veins. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be exploring the ways in which art can be used as a way of processing, identifying, and healing. We agree in this moment on the power of Indigenous minds, specifically in the creation processes to personally and structurally remove las cadenas that were first upon our respective First Nations original customs, traditions, and existence. When applied within the context of an educational space, what we're going to be doing is the decolonizing impact can be a healing agent for multi-generational and or multi and interracial student groups. So if this sounds like your cup of tea, su cafecito, please stick around because this is going to be a juicy one. And we are going to start off with, for both of you, Byron and Maria, what does it mean to be Indigenous? And how does the work that you do in your creative expression connect with your Indigenous heritage? Whoever would like to go first, come through.
Go ahead, Maria.
Okay. So I think for me, indigeneity has always been a journey. I am biracial, so I have mestiza heritage. My mother is part indigenous, and she also has part colonial ancestry. She is closer to her indigenous ancestry. However, because of how the U.S. neocolonial impact has had in the Northern Triangle, there was a lot of discrimination against indigeneity and presenting that indigeneity in public spaces. So she doesn't have a lot of direct knowledge about our indigeneity. I heard and intuited from stories and then learned in history and do my best to kind of decolonize myself in that process without appropriating any cultures that I can't make claim to. So it's kind of a rough journey. I don't have any direct connection to the language. I don't have any clear connection to the land because of the scorch and burns. We lost a lot of our land that was indigenous to our tribes. So for me, what it means to be indigenous is journey in one word. And that journey, that processing, was through my creative expression. At an early age, Papi, my abuelo, he helped raise me, and I would really struggle with my identity pretty much as soon as I entered school. The second I entered the K through 12 system, suddenly I wasn't Latina enough, and I wasn't enough, and I didn't know who I was. And it was just very strange to be in those spaces, in those normative spaces, and having other people apply an identity that I knew nothing about. I still know, I know of my paternal lineage, but I'm not very close with anyone on my paternal side. So for me, the writing process was healing. It was discovery, and that's what I unfold in that writing process.
Ooh, Maria, you just touched upon such a key thing about how identity is so personal and messy, and specifically when talking about the term Latinidad here in the US and in the South specifically, it often, unfortunately, it goes about with the erasure of Afro-Latinx and also with the indigenous community. And this is something that we definitely need to unpack, because if we're trying to use this term that is used to become an umbrella term to make all our community welcome, what is it saying? What is it saying when it's actually having the exact opposite effect, right? Byron. Now popcorning over to you. What does it mean to be indigenous to you?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Maria. To me, it means in one word, if just going off with Maria, she said, to me in one word, it would be reciprocity. And also it's a journey as well. But to me, being indigenous means knowing my ancestors' history and the role that it continues to play in shaping and the present currently right now in all type of ways of life. One example would be understanding the system of reciprocity of humans have with the land. Something simple as that, from weaving with natural fibers to make a basket that is both art and has a function. When I teach my students about this, or to the simple act of breathing, where we get our oxygen, and all these things of reciprocity on how we belong to the Pachamama, to the earth, to Mother Earth, and seeing nature not as a natural resource, but as an equal, and that we belong to it. And so that ties in with my heritage of, I come from a family of Basketweavers and agricultures. And to this day, most of my family in Ecuador, in the south part of Ecuador, we weave baskets, and that's our main income. And so I'm very proud of that. And now I'm here and in this mountain community, teaching young ones about weaving and basket making in some of my lessons, especially this month coming up. So
Thank you so much for sharing that, Byron. I want to add too, because my ancestors in the Lenca tradition were also agriculturalists, but again, because we were pushed off of that land, we were disconnected from that part of our tradition. And I saw the ways in which agricultural concepts were applied to leadership in my papi. He was, he was a leader, he was a writer, he was a musician, a composer. So he really fused all of his art into the way he led community organizing. And I also see his spirit in myself as well. But I have made an attempt in my personal life to connect with the land and to, make some time to try to learn those traits that I was never taught. And my mother has done the same. And her garden is impressive. She'll just take roots or branches from trees all over, wherever she sees. If she sees a tree she likes, she takes a branch and she sticks it in the ground, and somehow it grows. And to me, I think that's just an amazing spiritual connection. And yeah, so what your answer just really makes me think of just kind of so much spirit that's intuitive in our DNA.
Yeah, and when it comes to land ownership, we belong to this earth. We can go anywhere in this world and still be fine, breathing air, obviously with other resources. But when it comes to land ownership, my grandma, who I call mom, when she was younger, from an early age, her family had to work in order to be able to farm that land. So it was called an hacienda, the hacienda system. So some of you might be familiar with that concept of oppression and slavery. The hacienda system, with some folks, gave them a piece of land that they could live, and it's usually the land that's not the best. And then if they would give the land a piece of land, and then in return you had to go. And my grandma had, with her family, they had to spend 2 days just farming and growing other people's crops and stuff like that, so that they would be able to maintain that land. And sometimes there's stories where they would say how the hacendado, the person who's in charge, would not allow them to leave because they were supposed to leave right at sunset, but they will keep them a little longer, like you need to finish, keep going, and kind of overwork them. And so it's sometimes I hear that and like my mind connects with my biological mother who migrated here. And I remember one of her first jobs was working, I think, at a fast food restaurant, and how this person made her clock out like around 10, and then but kept her working until like midnight, almost washing all these extra dishes. And so it's the same, but in a different space. So this type of oppression.
Yeah, I actually see a huge connection there in the education sector. Um, all of these different policies that are written to restrict employers, quote unquote, and making it illegal to compensate fairly. I actually am in dialogue with folks in the Black community who are, in student affairs, working 12, 13-hour days and completely incapable of being compensated fairly for that overtime. And the reason that they're given is that it would be illegal to do so. And to me, that just sounds ludicrous. Like, y'all made up a rule so that you didn't have to pay folks, which is the same system that you've been doing in all of these other countries that you've been colonizing. So you're just bringing colonization right here in our educational sector.
Ooh. Y'all, I'm just here sitting down and hearing from these two glorious minds. If you'll have any questions or comments that, any reactions that you're getting from this conversation, please drop it in the chat below. Because, I'm just here trying my best to not even interact, because, this back and forth that Byron and Maria is having is just fire. But I just want to connect to your last point, Maria. What are the systems of oppression that are impacting us today and that are rooted in the history of colonization?
So I can start with this one. So one of the systems, if you read on the history of Latin America, there's a point after post-colonialism at the very early years where there's this whole system created and applied, which is blanqueamiento. So I read a lot on this, and it helped me better understood some of these behaviors that at times people within my own community of Indigenous have towards our own people. It's almost how I see it is it's creating this mentality of that could be easily connected to white supremacy, just in Spanish, just in a different language, can easily be connected. And it's catering to whiteness, pretty much. And, I experienced this when I was when I grew up in Ecuador with the people in the rural area, and then the people in the city when my grandma took me selling baskets from door to door. And then when we got to the city, it was almost like those are different people than we are. And like, we have to talk a certain way and act a certain way. And at that time, you were not sure, but as I got older, I started realizing all of this. And so reflecting all on blanqueamiento and why people have these behaviors. And I don't want to point fingers and blame anyone. That's not my goal as an educator, but, understand how we think and our behaviors, and we can change those things. But it's very difficult and challenging when people migrate to the US, we bring all of these behaviors and ways of thinking. And so, you can see it in today in like the media, Spanish speaking media, and all of these spaces that are catered to whiteness. And people, this might be a little sensitive, but in the past, with all this blanqueamiento, even like how they wanted to center even religion around a white male God. So unconsciously or consciously, sometimes we tend to say things. And so blanqueamiento, one phrase that recently affected the way of how I how would I say, think about things is like this constant phrase that I always heard, and I haven't heard it in a while, but recently I heard it again in my own family, which is mejorar la raza, which is bettering the race. And that comes from directly, you can link it to blanqueamiento. And so knowing this history, knowing how it has shaped our way of thinking, and how we can change that, I think it's something that we can probably create more dialogue around, and be more understanding of how sometimes things have become the standard at times because we have never fully challenged it. And for my grandma to our elders and how they taught me how to behave a certain way when we encounter other people that are, their skin tone might be lighter than us. It's not their fault. I'm not pointing my finger at my grandma or my elders, but through education, because of my education and how I'm able to learn more about this, now I'm able to create those dialogues, through education. So we can do that.
Wow.
Yeah, after hearing you talk, Byron, I have like a whole constellation of ideas and dialogue that probably don't fit within the time frame of today. So I really hope that y'all continue to dig deeper onto blanqueamiento and like what that means for people with Latinx intersectionality, but just as a whole, migration, and how that intersects with educational spaces. I think when it comes to the systems of oppression that I challenge on a daily basis, I would probably see the backbone of colonization, which one of the main tools of the colonizer is the settler native slave triad, which triangulates the Black population against the Indigenous population in a sort of competition against each other in order to move the white settlers up to the top of the power pyramid. And so that is something I see on a daily basis. And it used to enrage me. It still does, obviously, but it used to enrage me to the point of a debilitating capacity. Like I could not function emotionally because it was weighing me so heavily down. And so what my narratives and dialogue spaces have created for me is a place to channel and process what I'm experiencing in this triad, and a way to release that and find the imagination, the indigenous imaginary, if you will, to unleash what the solutions could be, what the options could be. I don't have the answers. I don't have the data, the ABC that the colonial institution would love. That's part of the settler native triad. The white settlers sit at the top and say, okay, yeah, we can change. You guys have to prove why we need to change and how to change it. And that's part of it. We have to work harder. We have to prove ourselves. And meanwhile, those who are white settlers are they have natural pathways in the system already. So they don't have to put in the same level of work. And those of us with any sort of indigenous connection or Black connection do have to do that work. And we begin to, within that system, if we're not taking ourselves out of that framework, we begin to see ourselves as combatants, as working against each other for the same position, for the same resources. It's a colleague in the LatinxEd fellowship had mentioned it before, this scarcity mindset. So yeah, I think that's how the creative expression, at least for me, is creating a counter narrative. When I'm working with students, I'm constantly, this particular group that I'm working with this semester is real interesting because we all share a similar identity and we all share similar frustrations. And so we have been talking about who is our audience. Like, are we speaking to the people who are causing us pain? Or are we speaking to the people who are like us? And so it's really up to the individual voice, the individual strengths, and the individual capacity. But for me, I've learned that, the people who are causing me pain and who are choosing to cause me pain, because at a certain point, once someone has told you, this is what I need, this is what is happening and they're not making the changes, then at that point they're choosing to cause you pain. And so for me, that counter narrative has given me power because I have chosen to say, well, now I've processed this. I see that this is abuse and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. So that's kind of how creative expression has created a counter narrative dialogue for me. Byron, do you have like a perspective on that too?
So sorry, I was thinking, man, I lost your last phrase. I was thinking on one more thing on blanqueamiento, on how it was like an open border policy for some of these countries in Latin America to get more white people in these countries like Brazil, where majority was indigenous and Black at that point. And so white people wanted to retain power. And so one way was to do it was increase numbers, but also through art, symbols, and these other things. And today we could see it, we could probably relate it to immigration to the US. For example, the US doesn't have issues with people immigrating, they say, as long as you follow this process. And from my experience in my family, or neighbors as well, people that often get a permit to visit the US are people who have businesses, people who have who own land, people who live in the city. And so a lot of these people tend to be lighter skinned individuals, but people who cannot have this privilege are people who live in rural areas, and those people tend to be people of color, indigenous people who don't have the money, the land. Sometimes they have they don't have much to put on a piece of paper for an application to get a permit to visit the US or visit a loved one who they haven't seen in 15, 20 years. So anyway, sorry, I wanted to add that at the end.
Byron, nothing to apologize about. And something that I just want to say to you both, I just want to give such a shout out about how both of y'all have been looking for these resources to learn about blanqueamiento, colorism, mestizaje, and all of the ways in which the Latin American countries and the centuries long heritage that comes with this very sad and this very frustrating heritage that comes with this. Both of y'all have gone out of your way and you've been proactive to find this, because unfortunately, this is not part of the curriculum, right? This is not something that is talked about within our educational system. And even in Latin America, let's address the fact that if we speak Spanish, that is too a European language. And what does that say? Let's just go back to 1492. So we also need to keep that in mind. And I just want to let y'all know that this is all resonating with Dr. Nikki Flynn. They mentioned that this is why inclusion is so important, confronting ideas of martyrship and how to reach for positive reframes, ! Okay. So, if y'all don't mind me moving the conversation forward, I'm just curious now about what are the barriers and challenges to Indigenous identity development in the US?
I'll start with this one. People think colonization is over, and it's not. So we're constantly still battling colonization while trying to figure out the history of colonization in the process of being gaslit.
Oh, short and sweet. Mic drop, Maria. Byron.
Yeah, with neo-colonialism right now, it's happening with my family, and I asked you to look up this if you have time, and whole Ecuador and the Amazon too, where these big companies that are tied to Russia, China, and also the U.S. sadly, that they want to build or look for gold and other metals, or even in my community, they're trying to build a dam that's supposedly provide electricity, but we already have electricity. We don't need more electricity in our community, and they want to do this, and they want to kill and damage our environment where we live, our paramo environments. And so if you want to read or look more on this, the river is called Yanuncay, and the people there, our community, are fighting hard to not let these big corporations that are backed by other corporations that are trying to get into this environment, where, you know, under all of this land, there's other minerals and what they call, or see it as, resources to be exploited. So, but yeah.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. I'm working on a poem right now, and it is dedicated to my cousin, who is one of the water protesters in Honduras, who was wrongfully wrongfully held in, like, he's imprisoned right now for protesting against some very terrible things that they were going to do to water sources. He was protesting for clean water, and he was one of the privileged ones who was able to find the ridiculous amount of bail that they put for those protesters. And even still, they found a way to charge him for something that he didn't do. So he's back in prison. He has been in prison for years. This happened years ago. So just for protecting his land, for protecting, I mean, and it's not even, he doesn't live there anymore. He doesn't live in Honduras. He lives in Texas. But he wanted to protect the land of his ancestors, and now he's being punished for it. So I'm writing a poem right now to process that and to honor him and the story, to make sure that his story is told in a light that kind of challenges the colonial media that's being framed around that situation.
I'm going to answer your question directly, Carol, but one more thing I'm going to say based on that comment, that what these big corporations mainly do, they just, first they split the community up. They bring and they say that we're going to give you jobs, we're going to give you this, maybe chairs for your church, maybe we're going to give you paint your school, whatever, give you jobs to the community. And so that divides the community. So now we have within the community a divided, a division. And so now we have members of the community going against each other. And that's the first process that they do in every single scenario. And so that, what that does is, worsens our fight against that. But anyways, but going to the question directly. So the barriers and challenges to our indigenous identity development in the US, I would say that policing, what is the word? Policing Latinidad. What does Latinidad mean? Okay. I think that's one of the challenges that, who gets to say that? And for me, it's very important first to identify as my ancestors, how they have identified, because they have fought hard and they've been resilient and throughout many years with all that are still going on today with the land. And so to me, that's very important to put at the front. And then Latinidad is kind of, to me, some of these things that I have in common with other folks, but it's not the one thing that defines me, or but people tend to want to force that label and erase, it seems like, what my ancestors have fought so hard for, in my perspective. Now, I know everybody has different perspectives. I completely understand that, but I think one of the challenges or barriers is, policing. It seems like people want to define it and say this is Latinidad, and it always seems to be catered towards white Latinos or whiteness, in a sense, to me, from my perspective, how I have lived my experience here in North Carolina in the US. So, and not allowing for younger people to be able to reconnect with their heritage and going beyond nationality. So, for example, like, I'm from Mexico, but go beyond that. What does that mean? Or I'm from Honduras, or I'm from Ecuador. But that the whole concept of that country just started not long ago, but go beyond that. What does that mean? So I think that would be a barrier, not having those spaces for young people who have that connection, even closer, like myself here, where I'm able to go back to my grandma and she's telling me all these other information that, if I wasn't for her, I would be kind of part of this homogeneous Latinidad, and I would have cut my past and join what I see as, sometimes this big group of blending of Latina, whatever that means.
Yeah, I think to Byron's point, like there's a lot of the melting pot ideology that happened in identity development when I was growing up, and there was a lot of shaming when it came to like brujeria and like indigenous practices, even in the smallest ways that they came out and manifested. Whatever survived was shamed by my peers, and it wouldn't really matter like where they were from. They could have been white, they could have been black, they could have been Latinx, but that one indigenous part of me, it was always strange, right? Like, I don't know, it was always different. It always made my abuela kind of like exotic, like a token, like something to be observed and watched, but like not like maybe something I should avoid. And that's the lesson that I inherited. So really, I have to first dig the weeds out of self-loathing, and some of it is unconscious, and I have to grapple with that myself in order to move forward. And so I found that that's unique to the South. I don't know if that's applicable throughout the U.S., but it was definitely my experience in the South. And then also there's a unique hegemony, like Byron mentioned and alluded to, of country of origin being kind of like the main source. And there are a lot of Chicano influences in the U.S., and rightfully so. They really led a lot of civil rights movements. However, I couldn't see myself in Latinidad or in indigeneity because I wasn't part of the Chicano culture. And so that was definitely a barrier to me, specifically from my family's perspective, being from the Northern Triangle.
And I want to share one more thing, if I can, Kettle. Something very cute that happens today. So I was observing at a school today. I'm a teacher at Johnston Elementary, so shout out to Johnston and also Estes. But today I had the pleasure of going out observing at Glen Arden here. And I was telling my students about myself, how I was in the classroom, what I was doing. And I told my students that I know Spanish, I know English, and I'm learning 2 other languages, which is sign language, and also I'm reclaiming my learning more about my language, Quechua. And I told them about a little bit about Quechua. And then a student who was sitting listening, he goes, I know Spanish. And he said, I'm also learning another language that's kind of old too. And he started counting to 10 in Nahuatl. And my heart, I was just like, someone out there is providing that space for the student to, learn his indigenous language, for that to still be alive. And that's man, I wish almost every student who had that link, that connection, or wanted to learn more about their history, well, had that. So that to me made me happy. So that's my highlight of the day.
Oh, wow, that actually just, I don't know if it's because of the cafecito
I'm
that
getting
I'm
real
drinking this way,
emotional.
but I just got shivers with you sharing that, Byron, because we know, and I did not mean to cut you off, Maria, but we know that these efforts to keep las lenguas alive and to keep the heritage alive, most of this, oftentimes it happens with oral tradition, because unfortunately, when colonialism came through to all of our countries in Latin America, like they went out of their way to get rid of any type of scripture, of any type of resources that already existed, for all of this knowledge, for all of these languages to come through and to continue surviving. So what both of you are doing right now, Byron, and with Byron and Maria, and with that student that you shared, like that is resistance, like saying, proudly saying, this is me, esta soy yo, este soy yo. Like, y'all can't come here and make me want to assimilate to this idea that you have about Latinidad, or this idea that you have of, oh, you can't fit here because you're not actually portraying what it is that we have an idea of what Latinidad or being Latinx looks like. So, I just wanted to share that, because my goodness, Maria, come through, because I feel like I interrupted something glorious that you were going to share.
No, I was just gonna say I got real emotional, and I was gonna thank Byron for sharing that.
Thank you. No, it was amazing. It was an amazing moment, and something I'll remember for a while. And, you know, I hope the students, and there's other organizations, by the way, here in the mountains that are doing that around West Asheville, I believe. So I'm proud of some of these individuals who are, you know, maintaining the language, maintaining the practices, and, you know, in other individuals too, and explaining how our Indigenous history ties in with the traditions that we do today, from something like Dia de los Muertos, or, you know, anything pretty much. So.
Ooh, ooh, ooh. And that actually let me go off on a little tangent, like with Dia de los Muertos when it was happening, just specifically with Guatemala. On November 1st is known as Dia de Todos los Santos, and there's actually so many traditions that are linked to that, including there's this area in Guatemala, and once the pandemic, you know, lifts and we can actually travel again, there's this wonderful tradition that happens where they create these big kites, these paper kites. Maria, oh my gosh, if that's what you were going to talk about, do you want to unmute yourself? Because I could just go off this tangent. They essentially create these big paper kites with the idea that you're going to fly them very high, and that the sound that the wind does against the paper, that's actually going to keep like all the evil spirits or whatever in the cemetery astray. But then now it has evolved to a point where people spend weeks and so much planning happens for these barriletes, these big barriletes. And guy, I swear, they're like 10 feet tall. You need like a group of people to be able to pull them up and see them, and the designs that happens there. And there's always like so much empowerment with the designs that they create. Like you start seeing el maíz and the different, like the red, white, yellow, and black of the significance with the corn. And you just can't help but think like we are more than Dia de los Muertos. There's so many traditions that are encompassed within our community. Maria, come through. Ooh, I saw your excitement.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I wrote an ekphrastic about that because I remembered, you know, just kind of like that particular distinction of Dia de los Muertos in that particular region, and how excited my abuela used to be about telling me about what Dia de los Muertos meant in El Salvador. So I wrote a poem about it, and yeah, your story kind of just ignited my fire for that.
Oh my gosh! If by you saying that you wrote the story, is it in existence? Is it ready for you to share a little snippet of?
No, not yet. I have a thing about that, but it's an
Okay.
ekphrastic, which means that it's inspired by another work of art. And so I took a kite that I saw that was moving, and I just like put it into words.
Oh, y'all, if you ever need some creative juices and you need creative inspiration, like please follow Maria and Byron, because every single time that we talk, I'm just like, oh, I just want to hear the progress and updates that y'all are doing. But as you may see, it's very easy for me to go down rabbit hole with these two beautiful humans. So let's continue this conversation. Let's continue with this conversation. I'm very curious, Byron and Maria, about what after this conversation that we've had, and after we have acknowledged that the systems in place right now, they are white supremacy fuels them. There is no space for Indigenous knowledge. I'm so curious, what does education mean to you?
So for me, education means knowing our histories, so that we can better the world in the present right now in order to build a better future for everyone, you know, for everyone. It includes humans or animals, our planet Earth. So we learn from the past, from our mistakes, from everything, and how we can better that, and knowing our place here on this earth for the time that we have in order to make the next generation better. And I think that's, you know, one of either once you're born in this world, I think, in my perspective, in our Indigenous perspective, that it is our responsibility to take care and prepare the next generation, whether you have kids or not. You know, either your aunt, you're a neighbor, whatever role you play in the community, you need to learn from your ancestors in order to better prepare the next generation, so that we can live in harmony and understand these rules of reciprocity that we have with the Pachamama, with our Mother Earth, in order to create more harmony in the world. So that, I think, for me, what education means, and I'm happy to be involved in this public education, something that I wanted to do for a long time, and finally got to my first year as a visual arts educator. So
Yeah, and I think for me, education is learning what things mean to me. It helps me to understand what it isn't, and it isn't just the formal spaces and processes that lead to a diploma or to a degree. It's beyond that. It's anything that creates and forms a part of who you are and what you value. And so, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Oh, wow, wow, wow. Like y'all are here like saying like taking the wisdom from our ancestors, setting up the future generations ready. And you, Maria, saying about making sure that we're adding value, taking the things that we consider valuable and going forth with it. I'm just here like I'm y'all's biggest fan, or I'm one of y'all's biggest fans, because truthfully, that's the whole point of education, right? To help us move forward and actually sustain our community, to make it sustainable for everyone. And Byron, I'm just telling you, I'm getting a little bit jealous that I'm not one of your students, because I can't even imagine what it must be like to have you as an art teacher. Oh, I'm just like, oh, those students are in for a treat. And what I would love to ask y'all, now that y'all have stated what education means to you, I'm very curious about, for both of you, how can we make space for ancestral knowledge within this institutionalized academic knowledge? I know I'm just here coming with the light questions. Y'all take a minute if you need to think about this one, because
No, I think I'm ready.
Maria, come through.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the agriculture thing, you know? We are planting seeds, and you are more successful at planting seeds if you can take out the weeds, create a barrier between the rich soil that you are using as the environment to nurture that seed, and put some distance between where the soil that used to be the fuel for the weeds. So, really putting some distance between those who have indigeneity and ancestral knowledge from the coloniality that is toxic to them. And then nurturing them until they are strong enough to survive and endure through winter, through harsh conditions, and through the weeds.
To the weeds. Byron, you want to take it away?
yeah, so this question makes me think of I think I also commented to Maria in the past that when I grew up, my grandma, she went to school to learn how to read and write, and later on she wasn't allowed to go to school because of she was a woman, and in that time you had to stay home and do other things. But she was the smartest one in her community at that time, her generation, or one of the smartest one. And according to her teacher, who wanted her to go to college in the city, but so she always knew how to keep track of time, knew how to keep track of everything in her mind, and looking at nature, knowing the migration of animals. She would tell me, you notice it's about to rain, we need to hurry and finish washing our clothes in the river because a storm is coming. And so she would tell me how she knows this by looking at the particles that come in the water, by looking at the migration of this specific type of bird that goes downstream making these noises. She would tell me it would hail the next day by looking at the clouds and the shape of the clouds, and feeling the temperature, and feeling, like actually just feeling the temperature, going outside and actually being able to tell by just by doing that, being in nature, and by looking at, paying attention to the change in just in general of nature when it is time to plant, how you should plant, What do you need to do every once in a while to take care of your plants? And all of this knowledge is for you to pretty much live in harmony within the community and with Mother Earth. And so and then she would also tell me things about historical dates from her mind that her ancestors would tell her. But then when I immigrated here, when I was brought here by my biological mother, obviously I started going to middle school, high school, and couldn't never fit in with the other students. But then I went to college, and then as I kept learning more about history, I wanted to learn more about my history. You're curious, so in things sometimes I would question what my grandma taught me as I went through this journey, and I would have to go back and like question her knowledge. And almost every time she was right. And so I felt guilty once I did that. I was like, I'm here questioning my grandma's knowledge because I'm being taught how to come out and accept the concept as a truth or as a valid belief that we can count on. And so, how can we make space for ancestral knowledge within the institutionalized academic knowledge? I think we can do it through various ways. One of them, not doubting our ancestors, not doubting their achievements. When I was going to school to learn about visual arts, from all over the world, and we were talk about visual arts and history of our indigenous people in Central and South America, there would always be things like, well, we're not sure how they did this, or, it could have been something else. Maybe even today, they're like, was it aliens? But it's like, what? No, you are stealing or you're taking away from their knowledge and their way of like how awesome and bright they were. But here we are questioning if, it was aliens. There's no way they could have done this. What about this? All these crazy theories. But I think our ancestors were brilliant the way they did things, and of course made mistakes as we are humans. But we shouldn't be discrediting their knowledge and their technology. And today we're figuring things out that we, through colonialism, sadly destroy, with one thing being like quipus. Some of you might be familiar with quipus, the way of recording in the Andes region information. And a lot of these were destroyed because people thought they were demonic things that people kept in their homes and in places. But they carry a lot of information. It's one of the few three-dimensional ways of recording information in the world. And so people are still studying it, but one of them is just not discrediting ancestral knowledge. So many generations and years, and they didn't come up with some of these things out of nowhere.
Byron, I was dead when you said like, oh, surely it was aliens, because that is definitely the erasure and discrediting what you said, the ancestral knowledge. How is it that people are thinking conspiracy theories when in reality it's like, actually in this area there was already these amazing civilizations that had this knowledge. You just don't know about it because the colonizers went out of their way to actually erase all of that backtrack that they had this knowledge. I'm just like, when you said aliens, I'm like, of course, that's the most logical step. Maria, please come through.
Oh yeah, I think one way that, like, what that looks like in a practical level on a day-to-day, because I think that's one thing that Indigenous folks are struggling with is like, all right, I hear you, but I'm still in my profession. How do I navigate this world? I'm still learning. I'm still in college. I'm still in high school. Like, how do I show up? And I think what that looks like, what Byron's note of honoring the ancestors and not discrediting them is, don't code switch. Stop code switching. Because that's damaging ourselves. That's discrediting our ancestors. That's giving coloniality power. And, I've been guilty of it. I honestly, I want to apologize for entering this space, having, feeling like I was code switching in a previous space. And so Yeah, there's a lot to unpack, but I think code switching is one of the ways in which we constantly continue to discredit our ancestors.
Ooh, ooh, ooh. And y'all, oh, as you can see, we should definitely have Cafecito Part 2 because both of y'all are just, I feel that you are the ancestors in the making that our community needs. But I want to wrap up with a question from the audience. And I know that I have not just, been sharing hard-hitting questions so far, so let's just do this. But the question that they've asked right now is, how do you keep yourself motivated to continue representing Indigenous roots without feeling burned out, mentally or emotionally exhausted?
I had a really, really amazing family support system growing up. I was raised by my mother and my abuelos and my tios, and I carry them with me, and my sister too, my hermana. I can't forget her. Um, and I carry them with me everywhere I go. Uh, on top of that, I've created a new support network as well for all of the other identities that I've developed since then. And I I lean on them when I can and I support them, and that gives me fire to keep going.
I love that. Byron, how about yourself? And I'll repeat the question for you if you want. How do you keep yourself motivated to continue representing Indigenous roots without feeling burned out or being mentally or emotionally exhausted?
So one thing that has helped me here living in the mountains, just in nature, here in the mountains in North Carolina, and also, you know, um, reading more and dialogue, creating dialogue, and also going and sometimes talking to some of the Indigenous people here, the Cherokee people, I through Western North Carolina, Western Carolina University, I was able to meet a lot of folks who I found more similarities with than I ever did with some of some of my other Spanish speaking friends, in terms of talking about culture, talking about customs, ways of living. And it's just so much similarity that, man, I sometimes I feel like I'm talking to some of my relatives back home, when we talk about certain things that relate to our Indigenous ways of living, and just being inspired by nature, creating and keeping in touch with family, have a good support group back at home. But yeah, just being inspired by what other Indigenous communities are doing here in the US, so yeah.
I love it. I love that both of y'all's answer, the main theme with it is having a community that you feel is supporting you and that is sustaining you in this process of decolonizing your identity and also decolonizing the space or educational spaces. And if I can just say for everyone who's listening to us, this is not the end of this conversation. If I had my way right now, I would make this conversation last for 3 hours, but ooh, these two, Byron and Maria, they're both already, they need their rest. They have earned their rest. But I just want to say for both of you, Byron and Maria, thank you so, so, so much for this space. Y'all, if you want to follow them in the chat, we have shared their contact info, whatever social media that they are on. But I just want to say that right now, my heart is running over. I'm just so thankful that we have both of you as leaders in North Carolina and that y'all are leading these conversations, these very much needed conversations, because it takes so much courage to be the only one in a space, in a room that is saying, hey, y'all aren't taking into consideration our Indigenous folk. You aren't doing this, you aren't doing that. So I just want to give that shout out to both of you, because that is leading with courage. And like I mentioned before, you two are becoming the ancestors that are setting us up to make it so that our community is well sustained. So for everyone that has joined us, thank you so, so much for having joined us, for having joined this very lovely cafecito. And please stay tuned for future conversations. Byron, Maria, muchísimas gracias.